Hi, I'm Dr. Carole Garrison, and today I'm going to give you a very brief history of women police in the United States. Women police started probably in the early 1900s. Actually, the first official woman police officer was a woman named Alice Stebbins. And she was really a matron at first, and then finally became an official police officer with arrest powers. Most of the women who became involved in law enforcement back then were matrons, or they worked with juveniles or wayward women. They were not full officers. They didn't carry weapons. They rarely had arrest powers. Then when World War II came and a lot of American men went overseas to fight in the war, women again joined police departments like they did in many wartime occupations, only to be sent home when the boys came back. It really wasn't until the civil rights movement and the feminist movement of the 60s and 70s that we saw women again trying to get into law enforcement as a career. And because of affirmative action and EEO kinds of laws and regulations, we began to see women re-entering law enforcement and actually taking on the role of patrol officer. I think it was in 1961 or 63, the first female became a patrol officer, and within 10 years we had our first female fatality on patrol. About the time that we began to see women entering police departments in bigger numbers, we were looking at about 10% of the entire law enforcement population being female. Today, we range between maybe 5% on smaller rural departments, and maybe 15 to 20% on a few big departments, even 25% females. But women make up over 50% of the population and over 50% of the job market. So we really haven't reached any kind of equity. And why is that? Well, the research gives us 3 good reasons why we don't see a greater number of women in law enforcement. One is simply choice. A lot of women who for many, many, many years have been told that policing is a male occupation, what we call a male gendered occupation, simply choose not to go into that field of work. They don't see it as something they would like or enjoy. Another group of women find swing shift, which is a very difficult lifestyle. You never know what your schedule is going to be from one month to the next. Very difficult, especially since women are still the main child rearers and child care deliverers in American families. So that plays havoc on their ability to do the job. And finally, sexual harassment. Even today, women in law enforcement often leave because of the misogyny and sexual harassment that they find in their workplace. So we are sitting now, despite consent decrees, affirmative action, EEOC, a greater awareness that women can do the job. The research shows not only are they equivalent to their male counterparts across most of the important skills required for law enforcement, in some cases they're even better. They do a better job, for example, in community-oriented policing. So that kind of catches you up to where we are today. We're looking at between 15 and 25% of law enforcement across all sectors, including federal and state levels, being female. We don't see that changing much in the future. We see a few women moving up in the ranks, but they're still very much in the minority when it comes to supervisors and police chiefs and people of rank. And I'm not sure, having been in this business for a long time, that that's necessarily going to change. We see pretty much the same statistics in women in the military as we see women in law enforcement. What would be nice is if the sexual harassment and the hidden subtleties of sexism in the workplace would change, and women would not only stay in law enforcement in these numbers and maybe even greater numbers, but stay and thrive so that they can serve their communities in the same way that their male partners do. Okay, so now that we've rushed through 110 years of history of women in law enforcement, let me share with you a little story, a personal story, that maybe is illustrative of what I've just kind of rushed through in the last 5 minutes. So I'm going to read you a personal essay. I wish you had let me go to Vietnam and become a war hero, my ex-husband Franklin whined during one of our arguments leading up to the final dissolution of our 9-year marriage. I muttered to myself, if I knew what a prick you were, I would have gladly let you go. In 1973, the lawyers congratulated me at the end of Florida's no-fault divorce hearing. I was emancipated. A single mother of 2, thrust into the world with a decade-old college degree in Soviet government and a secondary education. I was thin, unable to eat more than a cup of cream of wheat at mealtime, small-boned and certainly not gifted in sports. But I was determined to move on with my life and prove myself a better man than my ex-husband. I would have never thought about the police as a job on my own. I can never remember being in a physical fight, ever seeing a gun, or for that matter, even knowing a cop. I had secret dreams of being an Avenger when I was little, but left those ideas behind decades ago. A friend, a mentor of sorts, had encouraged me to go into policing since the federal government had just passed LEAA, the Law Enforcement Administration Act, was in response to the public outcry against the police in the aftermath of student protests at the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago, which, among other things, reimbursed active police officers who went to college. I packed up my daughters and moved to Atlanta. The city's police department was under a consent decree and hiring women and minorities. I had a college degree. All you needed was a high school GED. I barely got in under the age limit of 32. What I didn't have was the required height, 5'9", the average height for a male. A woman in Pennsylvania had just won a discrimination suit against the Pennsylvania Police Department for their height requirements, and with months of the decision, Atlanta had revised its own requirements. She never got to be a police officer, but I walked through the door she opened. I also had to pass a rigorous physical agility test, 4 chin-ups. I had never even had to carry my own groceries to the car, much less work out at a gym. Women were known to have much less upper body strength than men those days. A metal bar went up across the top of each doorway of my apartment, and every day for 6 weeks I would jump and pull myself up until I could do three chin-ups. The day of my test, wearing a mini skirt with a snap crotch blouse, I pulled myself up 3 times. I hung there for a few seconds until the lieutenant giving the exam put his hand under my miniskirt. No other motivation was necessary. Polygraphs, background investigation, medical clearance, and finally the academy. The men boxed, the women watched. White women were preferred, black women more so than black men, to meet the EEO-AA mandates of the day. Pretty young women were selected to join the motorcycle squad. Black women went to foot patrol or drove the paddy wagons on night shift. Women like me, who resisted the quasi-military discipline of policing, had a very hard time with the hierarchy and finding our place. But I had a college education, so after OJT, I went directly to research and development. No women were on SWAT, and none were detectives. At first, I only got to work Vice when a woman needed to be searched, and the detectives thought she might be on her menstrual cycle. I spent almost 4 years on the Atlanta Bureau of Police Services. It was 4 years of living Susan Martin's big P, little w, small p, big W, policewoman, policewoman. I, as many of my colleagues did, became more like my male colleagues to fit in. I swore more, made jokes at horrific crime scenes, but I flirted shamelessly when needed and battled sexism and racism when needed. I helped design uniforms for women that fit our bodies but didn't make us look like stewardesses. I stopped a ranking officer from fondling policewomen as they passed him in the hall. And I even went on night patrol with an officer suspected of sexually harassing his female partners. However, I also joined other female officers assigned to make Christmas decorations for the department's Christmas party. I wrote enforceable legislation for the city council, worked special investigations, drew sketches of suspects for the detectives, wrote annual reports, worked public relations, worked Vice, and occasionally took on an executive protection detail. I wasn't physical, but I could talk my way out of most everything. I didn't take the sergeant's exam because I felt I lacked the street experience to be a supervisor on patrol. I did, however, think I would do a hell of a good job as chief. One story that stands out in my memory. Policewomen were subject to subtle and not so subtle harassment, but rarely, if you wanted to stay on the job, did you ever complain. "Don't blank this up," he called as I left his office. I had just convinced my boss to let me work the executive protection detail for Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, African-American woman representing New York's 12th Congressional District and the first woman to run for the United States President. In those days, Atlanta's Hartsfield Airport had only one gate, and we could deplane VIPs right on the tarmac. What could go wrong? I picked up the mayor's aide and official greeter, a beautiful young woman dressed in traditional African clothes, and went off to meet the plane. I checked in with the local police unit that covered the airport. "Garrison, that plane is late. Grab yourself some breakfast. It will be at least an hour," the sergeant on duty assured me, smiling and waving me off. Breakfast was good, and over our last of our coffee, the mayor's aide told me that this was her very first day on the job. A little before the hour was up, I got my patrol car and drove onto the tarmac to her scheduled gate. No one was around. No men with light sticks and tow trucks were anywhere to be seen. Finally, I found a baggage handler and asked why they weren't getting ready for the incoming flight from LaGuardia. "The plane with the congresswoman?" he asked. "Yeah, that one," I said, now suddenly sorry I had eaten so many pancakes. "That plane was here and gone an hour ago." The mayor's aide went pale. "Don't worry," I said. "She's a smart woman. I'm sure she's made her way to the hotel." "It's not her I'm worried about," she replied, her eyes downcast and frowning. In those days, everyone in town had a police scanner, and every call went over the same channel. The entire department, the entire city could hear. I called in. The radio conversation went something like this. "This is Officer Garrison. I've lost Shirley Chisholm." "Garrison, drive your car north on 75 to the Tennessee border. Turn the car into the highway patrol. They'll return it to us." I dropped the mayor's aide off at the hotel where the congresswoman was speaking and drove back to HQ. People were falling out of their office doors laughing and catcalling as I silently marched up to my captain's office. His secretary was smiling. The women's staff always smiled when a policewoman was in trouble. They didn't like us being there. "He's waiting for you," she said, not even trying to hide her amusement. I walked in, closing the door behind me. He laughed. "It's not funny. I have 2 children to support." "Don't worry," he responded. "The police commissioner just called. We are not to take any action against you. The mayor wants you to pick up Representative Chisholm and return her to the airport for her flight back to New York." Dismissed. He never asked what happened, and I would never tell, although I thought I saw him grin despite my summary dismissal from his office. I checked my tires. I hoped there was no sugar in my gas tank. I pulled up in front of the hotel just in time to see the mayor's aide, her lovely dark skin glowing, walking down the steps with a thin, distinguished-looking black woman in a navy blue power suit and a very broad smile, the result of a malocclusion which always made her look like she was smiling. The Congresswoman sat in front with me, and we started the drive back to the airport. Finally, I could resist no longer. "Congresswoman Chisholm, I understand why you intervened on the mayor's aide's behalf. She was an innocent victim of a prank. But why did you bother to save my skinny white ass?" "Honey," she said, smiling and patting my knee, "we gals got to stick together." I finished my MPA at night and was accepted to Ohio State for my doctorate in public administration. I had been forged anew in a crucible of brutality, sexism, and racism, policing in the 1970s. Patrol was a young person's game, and at 36, it was too late to move up the ranks in Atlanta's male-dominated department, making it almost impossible to make change from within. But with my experience and insights and a doctoral degree, I knew I could influence change from without. When I joined the department, there was not one woman above the rank of patrol officer. But in 1994, Beverly Harvard, an African-American woman who joined the department while I was there, became chief of police. So that's the end of my personal story and this brief history. I hope that you've gained some insight, and I hope that you will continue to think about the role of women in America's law enforcement. Thank you.